They say a dying man only speaks the truth, but the truth my father offered me was a poison pill dressed in regret. I stood beside his massive hospital bed, the sound of the ventilator a cruel metronome counting down his last hours. For 28 years, I was Elena, the only daughter, the heir apparent to Richard Sterling's vast empire, the sprawling estate, the international tech firms, the name that opened every door. Now his eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were cloudy, but they held a terrifying clarity just for me. My mother and sister, Lila, were briefly out, arguing with the head nurse over the temperature of the private suite. Classic them. This was my moment, the moment where he would tell me, definitively, that everything we had built together, everything he taught me, was leading to my eventual takeover. I leaned close, brushing the thin white hair from his brow. "It's all yours, honey," I whispered, needing to hear him confirm it one last time, needing the stability of his word before he slipped away. His lips barely moved. "Elena, listen. Before you go through the lawyers, there is something you have to know. Something I kept locked away for 30 years. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake before your mother and I were married. I have another daughter. Her name is Maria." The oxygen mask fogged slightly with the effort of those syllables. My blood ran cold, stopping dead in my veins. Another daughter? A secret? After all this time, this was his final confession? Not a blessing, but a confession of profound deception? He didn't wait for my response. He just squeezed my hand weakly, the foreline pulsating beneath his skin. "She needs it, Elena. I changed the documents last month. Everything is hers. You must understand." I yanked my hand away as if his touch was suddenly toxic. Understand? How could I understand? My entire life had been structured around this inheritance, around the expectation that I would carry the Sterling name forward. I had given up my 20s, working alongside him, sacrificing relationships, all for this future. And he gave it away to a ghost, a woman I didn't know, who had no claim, no history with the family, simply because of a deathbed spasm of guilt. The room swam. "You changed the will?" The words were harsh, grating, unrecognizable as my own voice. "Dad, we talked about this. You promised me. You built this for me." His eyes closed, the exhaustion of the confession already dragging him closer to the end. The machine beeped steadily, mocking my panic. Before I could demand more details, before I could scream the rage building in my chest, the door swung open. My mother, Diana, sailed in, draped in expensive silk, looking perfectly composed despite the circumstances. "Elena, darling, you shouldn't upset him." The doctor said, absolute calm. She looked at me, then at Richard, noticing the shift in his breathing. "What did he say? Did he confirm the foundation details?" I looked at her, searching her perfect, painted face. Did she know? Did she know he had another child? Her expression was one of mild annoyance at my distressed appearance, but underneath, I thought I saw a flicker, a flash of calculating dread. I didn't answer her. I just stared at my father, who had just stolen my future, and realized I was utterly alone in this hospital room, facing a betrayal so deep it redefined my entire existence. He died less than an hour later, without saying another word. The funeral was a blur of black suits and crocodile tears. My mother played the grieving widow with sickening perfection, leaning dramatically on my arm whenever a camera flashed. Lila, my younger sister, who had always coasted through life on Dad's credit cards, kept texting under the guise of holding a tissue. She only cared about one thing: how quickly the assets would be distributed so she could upgrade her sports car. I was numb. The shock hadn't worn off, replaced only by a cold, searing disbelief that my father, the man I idealized, could have committed such a brutal act of erasure against me. The day after the cremation, Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, arrived at the estate. He was a man with a perpetually damp handshake and eyes that darted nervously, especially when my mother was in the room. We gathered in the library, the mahogany walls lined with the trophies of my father's success that was supposedly mine. My mother wore a black dress that cost more than my first apartment. Lila wore sunglasses indoors. I felt like I was watching a cheap play unfold. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, opening the crisp, heavy envelope. As per the wishes of Richard Sterling, this is the final testament, dated 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago. The timeline aligned perfectly with his recent rapid decline. I clenched my fists, remembering his desperate confession. My mother beamed, assuming the bulk of the estate was hers, or at least that she would have significant control over the foundation I was meant to run. Harrison began the reading. A few minor trusts were established for charities. Lila was given a hefty, but clearly secondary allowance. Then came the major assets, the real estate, the controlling shares of Sterling Tech, the Swiss accounts. Harrison's voice dropped, becoming formal and unervingly quiet. The entirety of the remaining estate, including the primary residence and controlling interest in Sterling Tech, shall be transferred immediately to Maria Sterling. A collective gasp, then silence. My mother's jaw dropped so low I could see the expensive veneers. Lila actually removed her sunglasses, her eyes wide with genuine shock, not performance. I felt a strange, detached calm, like watching a tidal wave approach. I already knew it was coming, but the reality of the impact still paralyzed me. My mother shrieked, a sound that could shatter glass. Maria Sterling? Who in God's name is Maria Sterling? This is a forgery. Richard would never. Harrison, terrified, just shook his head. It is attested and notarized. A perfectly sound and legal document, Mrs. Sterling. He glanced at me, pity evident in his gaze. I finally found my voice, deadly quiet. She is my father's secret daughter, the one he abandoned 30 years ago and decided to make amends with on his deathbed. I looked at the lawyer. I want her address. No. I want to meet the woman who inherited my entire life. I need to look into the eyes of the person who stole everything I worked for, who stole my rightful future, and understand why she felt entitled to take it all from me. This is far from over. The address Harrison gave me led not to a penthouse or a gated community, but to a small, worn-down apartment complex 20 miles outside the city limits. It was the kind of place where the laundry perpetually hung on fire escapes, and the smell of stale cooking oil clung to the air. Maria Sterling, the woman who now owned the Sterling Tech empire, living here. It made no sense. I found her name on the mailbox, faded, handwritten on a scrap of tape. I took the rickety stairs to the 3rd floor, my expensive leather boots thudding against the cheap linoleum. When she opened the door, I was speechless. She was tired, maybe 30 years old, wearing a stained uniform from what looked like a fast food chain. She didn't look wealthy, predatory, or even remotely like the family I knew. She looked exhausted. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft and careful. "I'm Elena. Richard Sterling was my father, and you just inherited everything he owned." Maria paled, stepping back into the tiny, cluttered apartment. I knew about the will, but please come in." As I stepped inside, the contrast between my luxurious life and her reality was staggering. She didn't seek this out. She explained that Richard had found her months ago, ravaged by guilt, desperate to make things right because she was struggling. She refused the money initially, but he insisted on changing the will, seeing it as the ultimate act of penance for abandoning her mother. He wasn't giving her money. He was giving her back the security he took 30 years ago. He was trying to buy forgiveness with his legacy. But if you were Elena, the daughter who dedicated her life to her father and his business, how would you process this profound betrayal? Does a secret daughter, abandoned for decades, have a greater claim to penance than the dutiful daughter has to her promised inheritance? Let me know what you think in the comments below. The conversation with Maria shifted the ground beneath my feet. She wasn't a greedy opportunist. She was a victim too, albeit one who had just been given a golden parachute. She seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the vast fortune she now controlled. I never wanted to take it from you, Elena. Your father he was terrified of dying without fixing his past. He kept saying it was karmic justice. But I knew my father, and while guilt was a powerful motivator, outright cutting me out was too extreme. There had to be another player, a shadow. And the only shadow in our lives had always been my mother. I returned to the estate, ignoring my mother and Lila's frantic calls about legal challenges. I went straight to Dad's private study, the room Mother was supposedly cleaning out. I knew where he kept his real secrets, behind the leather-bound copy of Machiavelli. The small safe clicked open. Inside it wasn't gold or cash. It was a thick file labeled simply as inside the file. The truth began to unfold. Copies of bank transfers dated 30 years back. Huge, regular, quarterly payments. And crucially, a non-disclosure agreement. Maria had been receiving payments for years to stay silent and stay away from Richard, but the payments weren't made from Richard's private account. They were made from an account only my mother controlled, an account Dad had set up for her personal expenses. My mother had been manipulating the situation, paying off the secret daughter for decades, ensuring her silence, and perhaps making Richard believe Maria was a gold digger who just wanted money, not a relationship. But the payments had stopped 6 months ago, right when Richard's health failed. My mother had gone quiet, and Maria had resurfaced, found by a desperate Richard. The betrayal wasn't just my father's. It was my mother's decades-long scheme. Lila caught me in the hallway, clutching the file. Her eyes were red, not from grief, but from frustration. She cornered me, her voice low and venomous. You know Mom's fighting this, right? She's saying the will was signed under duress. We need to stick together. If we can prove that girl, Maria, manipulated him, we can get her out. Then, since you were already cut out, it reverts back to the next of kin. To me. I stared at her. Her selfish desperation was breathtaking. You knew, didn't you? About Maria? I demanded. Lila fidgeted, looking away. Mom told me years ago when I was in college. She said it was our family's dirty secret. She paid Maria to stay away, but Maria showed up when Dad was sick. Mom tried to throw more money at her, but she refused. That's why Dad changed the will. Maria wouldn't take the hush money anymore. Lila wasn't just my sister. She was complicit in my mother's decades of emotional blackmail and secrecy. She kept quiet, not out of loyalty to our father, but in the sickening hope that if I were removed from the succession line due to the scandal, she, the secondary child, would somehow benefit. The realization cemented my purpose. I wasn't fighting Maria. I was fighting the insidious rot that had defined my family for too long. The enemy was the woman who raised me, the cold, calculating schemer who had poisoned my father's life and mine. My rage sharpened into a cold, precise weapon. I called Maria. I didn't demand, I didn't threaten. I offered a meeting. We met in a neutral coffee shop far from the estate. I laid the thick file across the table. The payment records, the NDAs, the evidence of my mother's systematic suppression. Maria's eyes scanned the documents, widening with every page. I knew your mother hated me, but I didn't know she was the one handling the money, not him. When Richard found me, he was truly heartbroken, saying he didn't know why his letters were always returned. It clicked. My mother hadn't just paid her off. She had intercepted every attempt at contact Richard made, reinforcing the distance and making Richard believe Maria wanted nothing to do with him, deepening his guilt and his need for penance. She used your existence to control him, I explained, my voice steady. She made him feel like a terrible failure, ensuring he was emotionally dependent on her until the very end. I realized then that Richard hadn't cut me out of malice. He had acted out of panic and manufactured guilt, trying to redeem himself in the few weeks he had left. We need to work together, Maria. We honor his final wish for you to be secured, but we expose the woman who orchestrated 30 years of betrayal against both of us. Maria looked up, her soft expression hardening with a righteous anger I recognized instantly. She won't get away with this. Not after what she put my mother through. Not after what she put you through. I'm in. What's the plan? The plan was simple and surgical. Use the very legal system my mother was relying on to expose her fraud and emotional coercion. My mother's lawyers filed an injunction, arguing Richard was mentally unfit to change the will so drastically. This gave us the perfect platform. We introduced them as file. We showed the decades of carefully hidden payments, proving that my mother, Diana, had a long history of actively interfering in Richard's personal affairs, controlling his finances, and suppressing the truth about Maria. We didn't try to invalidate the will. We used the evidence to prove Diana's own moral turpitude and the emotional context behind Richard's final decision. The revelation hit the society pages like a shockwave. Elena Sterling, the pillar of the community, exposed as a manipulative blackmailer. The legal challenge against Maria collapsed spectacularly. Not only was the will upheld, but the details of Diana's financial maneuvers were made public, causing several major charity boards to demand her immediate resignation. Her reputation was annihilated. Lila, seeing the writing on the wall, abandoned the estate for a smaller trust fund Dad had set up years ago, running away from the scandal she'd helped conceal. My mother was left alone in the vast, echoing mansion, stripped of her status, her power, and her husband's protection. The karmic debt was paid in full. She had spent a lifetime building a fortress of lies, and in the end, it crumbled, leaving her exposed and penniless in the ruin. Maria took control of Sterling Tech. The first thing she did was call me. She didn't belong in the corporate world. She was overwhelmed. Elena, this is your life's work. Richard may have named me, but he wanted me to have security, not control. I don't want to be a CEO. I want to honor his final intent, but I need to honor your commitment too. She proposed a solution. She would retain a majority of the shares to ensure her financial security, but the control of the company and the day-to-day operations would be transferred to me. I accepted, not out of greed, but out of genuine respect for her integrity, something my biological family lacked entirely. The mansion was sold. Maria split the proceeds with me, ensuring we both had a fresh start, free from the toxic environment my mother created. My mother, now financially dependent on a small allowance that Richard had set aside for her, conditional on her good conduct, which she failed spectacularly, was left isolated and despised. I finally understood Richard's complicated legacy. He didn't intend to destroy me. He intended to right a profound wrong, and in doing so, he accidentally forced me to confront and destroy the real enemy, the manipulation woven into the fabric of our home. I gained a sister, a company, and most importantly, I gained clarity. I finally got my future back, but it was a future I built on truth, not deception. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this, please subscribe to the channel Dramatic Zone, leave a like, and write in the comments which country you are from. Stay tuned, there will be a new story tomorrow.